Welcome to Talent Talks, the podcast where your host Dan Maisie dives into hiring's ins and outs. Our goal is to reveal how to attract top talent. Through interviews with leaders in sports, media and entertainment, we explore job search and recruitment trends, offer interview tips and strategies to differentiate yourself, and uncover their hiring insights. Whether you're prepping for an interview or interested in hiring trends, Talent Talks is your essential resource. Let's dive in. We have Josh Bright, the sports visionary CEO of the year 2023 on the pod today. Josh is the trailblazing founder and CEO of Goal Assist Limited, which is leading the way in offering indispensable financial consultancy and support to football clubs navigating the complex landscape of football finances. With a robust foundation in football financial regulations gained during his tenure at the EFL, Josh has emerged as a leading figure in promoting financial sustainability and success within the football industry. Josh's combination of visionary leadership, profound communication skills, and in-depth analytical capabilities make him an invaluable asset to the sports sector and an intriguing guest to discuss recruitment and talent strategy in sports. Josh, welcome to Talent Talks. How are you today?
Yes, very well. Thank you for the very kind introduction. All well today. Pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let's get straight into it. We ask this to each of our guests to begin with. What are your experiences of hiring and being hired, and do you have any lessons learned?
Yeah, tons. So from a being hired point of view, my personal journey was I went from university almost straight into working at the EFL, and originally in the finance department, and then whilst we were there, without going into the whole details of it, we basically ended up founding a club financial reporting unit to specifically look at the financial regulations within the EFL. So from a recruitment point of view, it's been pretty much from my side, it's almost been a lot of companies now within football are applying the similar strategies in which they do on the pitch off it. So you have a lot of almost scouting, if you like. So how I went from university to the EFL was the EFL approached UCFB, which was where I studied, to put forward a list of candidates which they believe would be suitable for the role. And then from that, I went through a sort of a standard sort of hiring procedure. So first and then secondary interviews to then sort of get the job at the EFL. So from a hiring point of view, from a me going into employment point of view, that was sort of the journey I went on. Previous to that, we own other businesses, so I was just simply working for the family business, and that's sort of where I built my foundations in business, entrepreneurship, finance, all that sort of stuff came from my own sort of family business. From a recruitment point of view, in terms of recruiting staff to work for myself, again, sort of similar in terms of this. The starting base has been sort of a more scouting role in terms of looking at work in which we are fans of. So let's say marketing, for example. If there's organizations locally or within the sector that are producing really high quality content and it's somewhere which we have ins with those sort of people, we'll sort of lead discussions to see if there's any, appetite for change, or if there's any, or if they know of anyone, just so we're in and around the right people within the industry. Because it's all about the quality of the work. And I think, again, when we go out and sort of advertise jobs more widely, it's having that proof of concept. It's having that, how do we know, and having the certainty of they are of the ability to perform the tasks in which we require for the role. So my sort of advice from that point of view and from the lessons I learned was, if you can provide a comprehensive portfolio of work that can prove, because it doesn't need to be, for me, it's getting the balance between, because not everyone can get straight into having relevant work experience in the industry. But I think you can, as long as you can create a portfolio of work that isn't necessarily, paid work experience. It might be volunteer work. It might be your own sort of on the side hustle, sort of building that sort of, it doesn't even need to be for paid work. It can just be building up that portfolio of work. You might be, if you're working in finance, you might be able to conduct some analysis, write some reports, write some blog articles to show your understanding of different subject areas. That's the sort of stuff that we would really highly recommend. And then again, flipping back to when I've been going through job interviews, the one thing that I would sort of say to employers is you have to have a system, but you can't be too rigid in your structure, because you need to ensure that although you need to evaluate people's experience and education, if you're going to be working with someone full time in close quarters, you need to make sure their values, their personality, their overall values align with the company and those existing staff. And it only takes sort of one bad apple, if you like, to ruin the bunch. So you need to make sure that the people that you bring into your organization reflect those values. And I think that's really key to sort of ensure that your hiring process allows for sort of personality and personal touch to come across.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating answer, Josh, and I think one of the things that's really jumped out there is a theme that's come out a bit across the podcast in terms of that ability to do the job. How do you know somebody has got the aptitude and the ability to actually do the day to day without having them come in for a set period of time? So I want to I'll come back to that because I think that's a really interesting thing to unpack. But what I want to start on is the way that you went into the EFL, and similarly the way that you're now starting to approach your hiring in terms of that scouting method. Now, I think again, I think it's a fascinating approach. I think there's a lot of potential there. It's a very proactive approach, and therefore potentially pretty time consuming. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on that. But in terms of when you were at university and you were essentially put forward by them, do you know what the selection criteria were, as it were? As was there any discussions with you as part of that, or how did that kind of work in actual kind of operational side of things?
Yeah, so from my point of view, I did everything that I could at university to put myself in the best position as possible, because I realized very quickly on that for me, the football industry is one of the hardest industries to break into.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not only in competition with everybody else in the UK that are hoping to get these roles, but obviously more immediately, I'm competing against everybody sat in this lecture hall with me. So I sort of, because of my general competitive nature, I really set forth to make sure that I was the best of the best. So, I managed to finish university with a first class honours degree, was awarded the programme award for finance on graduation. I did so many extracurricular things and all the other additional courses that I could at uni to put myself in the best position possible. So I think if you're someone looking to get into work, you've just got to position yourself so that you can take the opportunities as and when they arrive. In terms of the actual process, what happened to be put forward, I think it was so the EFL approached the UCFB. UCFB selected, I imagine, about 5 or 6 students to put forward to the role based on grades, based on what they had done whilst at the university, which is quite interesting actually when you talk about process, because the university didn't have our CVs.
mm,
So it must have just largely been based on the impression that they had whilst they were there. Obviously, once the university had basically approached a handful of us, then obviously we put those who were selected sort of put their CVs forward, and obviously then the sort of process built from there. But I think the relationships that I built whilst I was at university, the quality of the work that I was producing, the work ethic, and all the rest of it that I applied was sort of the reason why I was put forward, along with the other candidates that were sort of put forward to the EFL.
yes. I think it's, yeah, I find it a fascinating way of doing it because I think as well what it kind of shows is how necessary really is a CV when uh, you take that approach and you've got people there that know what you're capable of, know what you can do, and actually, previous guests have said this before. A lot of the times in the recent history that he's been employed, he hasn't had to put a CV forward for anything or something like that because it's been that almost tap on the shoulder style approach. And again, that comes back to your ultimately your scouting terminology and method. When you're looking now for people to come in, and you mentioned about kind of looking at best practice and looking at what people are doing, how much emphasis do you place on the skill side of things in comparison to the value element that you alluded to it earlier, but how much, what's I suppose the emphasis on each part?
Yeah, so for me, because there is such a sort of large pool of demand for work at the moment. It's a very difficult job market at the moment. I know lots of peers of mine who are still struggling to sort of get into jobs, get into work, even though their CVs and everything are in a really good condition. So from our point of view, is when we put jobs out there, we tend to know that we're going to get at least a strong number of candidates that will meet the sort of ability benchmark, if you like. The sort of they're going to be competent. If you put the C, especially if you're going for sort of entry level roles, you're definitely going to get a large number of candidates that have the ability to conduct the work. It's then largely based on character references. Do we have any experience of the individuals in the past, or is anyone got any sort of connection to the person? How well do we know the person? If we can do that through, obviously you learn about the people through the interview process, but again, this industry being so small, everyone sort of knows someone, or everyone's heard of someone, although that sort of closes off the market slightly, having those sort of character references and understanding, the more you can understand the person, the more likely you are to sort of know their impact onto the team. So I think in terms of weighting, I think sort of character and work ethic and all those sort of key aspects of what it really takes, because understanding processes, understanding systems, executing the job, it's up to your management to make sure that you've had the appropriate training once you've secured the role, to make sure you're of the ability to do the role. If you've got to have got the hiring process very wrong to have sort of hired someone that's nowhere near the capability to perform the task, or you must have, the job description must be miles away from what they were actually required to do. So yeah, I think, to be fair, on reflection, it is heavily on sort of character and their personal impact on what are they going to bring to the office, what are they going to bring to the business from a personality and sort of commitment point of view, as much as it is their sort of experience and CV.
Yeah. And on that then, see, finance is quite a wide subject matter, and there's lots of different roles in finance from across lots of different sectors. How much emphasis do you place on this is slightly more experienced hires rather than somebody coming straight out of kind of graduate or school? But how much emphasis would you place on the sports experience element of it versus just making sure they're, like you say, they're the right person, but more fundamentally they've got the right skills regardless of the background that they've got?
Um, For me, if you've got experience in sport, especially in finance, it's obviously a massive plus, especially from a sort of financial regulations point of view, because there's far more sort of additional regulations that are applied on football clubs compared to in any other industry.
Hmm.
You'll also find that the financial makeup of football clubs is far different to sort of your standard, I don't know, newspaper shop or whatever. Like the way in which football clubs are run financially are vastly different to any other businesses throughout the UK. So having that sort of insight is a massive advantage when you're going for roles. I don't think it's exclusively that, but I think having that experience does massively help, because you understand the challenges of running a football club. You understand why certain accountancy practices are applied in the ways in which they are, which wouldn't necessarily be done in other industries.
Hmm.
This doesn't mean that's an exclusive process, and I think you assess the talent pool that you've got to see where you're lacking. I think it's more so adding skill. It's skill stacking, really. I think that would be the term I'd use. So it's not hiring the same person over and over again. I mean, I've been in work situations where I've seen a team of basically copies of each other.
Yeah.
And making sure you avoid that scenario is vital, because if you're only hiring, from a specific organization or from a specific background, you're not going to have the skill mix required to perform effectively and to be able to overcome a wider range of challenges. So I think for me, when looking at recruitment, it's identifying what's the mix, like what can we add in that we don't currently have. And sometimes that could be hiring someone that is outside of the sort of the sports or football realm, because they might add a different dynamic. Because you've also got to remember, realistically, football is a combination of multiple businesses. You've got a sort of a events company which does all the match day stuff. You've got a hospitality company that's running all, obviously, the hospitality on a match day. You've got a commercial company that's about sponsorship, bringing in all that sort of stuff. You've then obviously got all your football scout and recruitment, which is almost a completely separate company, and obviously all the travel and all the rest of it. So it's a football club is almost an ecosystem of lots of different companies come together. So if you've got, say, like a hospitality background, let's say, that could still be really, really important and valuable to understanding football club finances when looking at that specific niche of their finances.
Yeah.
So I think that is important to sort of get the balance within the team correct.
I could sit here all day, Josh, and pick your brains on finance and football because I find it fascinating, but that is not the topic of this podcast, unfortunately. I'll dig into that kind of skill stacking element that you mentioned there as well, in terms of when you are looking for people and when you are out in the market and you're talking to these people, what is it from a kind of core fundamental skill that obviously for goal assist that you are looking for in terms of almost in terms of the day to day, as it were. Now, obviously, values come into that as well. It'd be good to hear what kind of type of person you look for. But in terms of the things that you are looking for, if I'm coming into an interview, what am I trying to impress the CEO with?
In terms of what, so essentially, what are you bringing to the table? I think every company, well, I say every company, I'm being really over specific there. My company, what I look for is someone that can add value. So for my thing is, when you come for an interview, you're trying to sell on me the value that, because essentially, without making this sound too corporate and not personal, but essentially, an employee is an investment. You're
Yeah.
investing X amount of thousands of pounds in this employee every year for hopefully a positive return onto your company. Whether that is you already have a system in place which you know generates X amount of income and you need someone to come and run that system for obviously a lower number than what it's generating for the company for order it to make sense. Um, or you're hiring someone more sort of generically in terms of the organization is just all organically growing and you're just adding in members to the team to add in new dynamics and just to keep up with sort of the day-to-day flow of business. And that person is more, again, it's relaying the value that you add to the company. So that might be a specific skill, that might be a specific niche in which you have competency in, which, can add significant value. Let's say it's around a specific element of finance, or it could even be things like network. It could be a case of you're coming in and you have a really strong network yourself of that, although you may not have an experience or a specific skill, but you might be a case of you might be able to open doors for the company in which we don't currently have access to. It could be different markets, it could be different specific organizations or arms of football. Because again, just because I know that when people listen to these sort of podcasts or looking to get into football, people immediately think football clubs. There's such a wider range of stakeholders that sort of operate within the football industry, whether it be obviously sort of your FAs, your county FAs. You've got obviously all your suppliers to the football club. So you might want to go work at, say, like a Nike or an Adidas, or there's the leagues, or there's like you could go on forever.
Yeah.
There's such a wide range of ways into the industry. And I think if you have experience of anything that's relevant and any sort of skills or any sort of network that we think will add value to the overall organization, I think that's what we look for, really. Because if you're coming in and the transaction, almost like, you've got to remember that like a recruitment process is a two-way transaction in terms of both parties are adding value, we hope that our support network, everything that we do for our employees, the sort of environment that we've built, and obviously the financial rewards and all the rest of it add value to the person coming in. But in return for that, we also hope that the person coming into the business is also bringing value to the company. They're not, you know, it could just be a case of I can run this system that you've built very effectively, or it could be the fact that they can bring wider skills, wider values to the team. And that's, if you can have a combination of the both, that's where you've sort of got you know your perfect candidate as such.
Yeah, I think the way you termed it in the investment side of things, I think is exactly right, because you are quite literally investing in somebody, and so you need to make the right choice of that, because if you make the wrong choice, then ultimately it costs time, and it costs money. But equally, the candidate needs to invest in understanding what the job role is and what the opportunity is for them, where they can add value, exactly as you said, and prove that, and invest their time and their effort into the company. And you're right, that's the kind of value add on both sides. And I think, again, that's a bit of a theme that's come out from some of these podcasts in terms of that aspect of making sure that it is both sides, and it's understanding that it's both sides adding value. It's not just, I need somebody, I've got the power as an organization, I can choose whoever I want. Actually, it's, well, I need to add value to this person as much as they need to add value to me, to ensure that there's a strong long-term relationship that is beneficial to both. I want to go back to something you mentioned at the very beginning in terms of kind of the process around recruitment. How much, and I think you've kind of half answered this already, but I want to dive into it a little bit more in terms of the proactivity that you show, or in your words, kind of scouting methods. How much is it process versus intuition when you're hiring and when you're bringing people into Goal Assist?
Yeah, in all aspects, it's a combination of both. Obviously, the first thing is very process based, because it starts with identifying a skill gap or identifying a lack of support in a specific area. So realistically, your company, when you're recruiting, it should be because there's been growth in a specific area of your business. Because if you are sort of seeing yourselves not hit targets, or for whatever reason, and but the amount of sort of people within the department hasn't changed, there must have been something go wrong on the efficiencies point of view, because at some point you should have had the numbers that are correct. So hopefully when you see that sort of gap where sort of work's piled up, we need extra bodies in here, that should be because of we've had additional work come into the company. So that has been the trend so far. So it's identifying, okay, where do we need additional support? And then it's a case of, we've identified that's what it is. What sort of person, what sort of skills, and what sort of contract do they need? So, like, originally, it might just be a case, because I think some people almost look at recruitment as too black and white. So, like, we've recently had like an online sales manager who started off as only on 2 days a week, because we thought, do you know what? For what we need, we actually only need someone 2 days a week to start off. We don't actually need to we don't need someone full time. We just need 2 days just to see what the setup is, see what the processes is. And then within sort of the first 6 weeks, we took them on full time, because they sort of, they proved their value, and we wanted more of their time, but also we sort of we understood the role better the longer they were in. So it starts off process based in terms of identifying where we are needing the demand of the additional staff. Then you go through the sort of identifying the skills, make sure you create like a job description that reflects the role fairly and sort of identifies the specific skills required for that role. And then after that, once it comes down to the recruitment process, you've had all your CVs, you sort of sifted out those that don't hit the criteria that you require. You'll probably end up with, let's say, a top 10. And then you start your sort of a narrowing it down from there through interviews. And obviously, the more you have relationships, or the more you understand the people prior to that process, or the more you can, basically, the better you understand the person coming into your company, the more confident you can be in your investment. So, like I said before, whether that you've seen evidence of their work or someone has worked with them previously, etc., I think you can therefore there's less risk in your investment if we're talking in those terms, because you're more certain of the quality of the output they're going to produce. So yeah, that, and again, if it is someone that you haven't, it is sort of a fresh, you haven't seen the work, or you haven't got that previous experience, which you should have one of the two. But if you haven't, again, then you're going off intuition. You're going off, how do they come across in the interview? What sort of, how do they hold themselves? How confidently do they speak? Again, obviously nerves and stuff happen in interviews, and you obviously take all that into consideration. But yeah, it is largely process. But then obviously sometimes you have to almost go with your gut, especially if you've got multiple good options for the role.
Yeah, I think the flexibility element that you mentioned around making sure that you're bringing the right person in, but actually bringing them in the right kind of time frame and the right role, and whether that's freelancing or contracting, and actually organizations just being a little bit more flexible in terms of making sure that they're getting the right thing and the right person and the right skill set, regardless of what that is longer term, I think is something that we don't necessarily think about as much. And I'd love to get into it more, but Josh, I'm very conscious of your time, and I think, like I said, we could carry on talking for for a lot longer on this. But before we end, I want to make sure that we have enough time for the three quick fire questions that we ask every single guest. So we'll get cracking into that, and we can carry on our conversation on another pod further down the line. But what is your most frustrating thing about recruitment, Josh?
Oh, okay. Apologies. This is meant to be quick fire. Most frustrating thing about recruitment, uh, maybe is timing, because it's what the one thing you can't control massively. And it's almost, you need the adaptability, and you need the ability to bring in people sometimes quickly, or you need the ability to plan. Sometimes you're in a position where you can plan ahead because you can schedule the workload, and you know the growth. But for me, as starting goal assist, sort of 2 years in the early stages of your business, hopefully you see scale quickly. So you sometimes have to be quite reactive in the way in which you hire, which isn't a negative thing if you again have the right processes and systems in place. But yeah, timing is sometimes key. Is a key element which you have less control over. So that would be frustrating.
Good, and don't worry about the fact that it's not quick fire on all the time. Most of our guests haven't been quick fire on these questions, so it's absolutely fine. Second one, who has been, and you don't have to name them, but you're more than welcome to, who has been your best and why?
Okay, our best hire has been, again we won't name them, but there was a member of staff that sort of came in at straight out of high school with very little qualifications in terms of educationally, but just needed a job. And then it started off. This was within. I have multiple companies, so this actual hire was it was within our construction and gardening business, but started off in the warehouse, and then over the course of stayed with the company for about 10 years, but slowly worked their way up into like a quite senior management position. And it sort of just showed sort of the hard work, dedication, turning up with the right attitude. It didn't matter sort of where they started; it was sort of where they ended, and that sort of gone on for that person to go on and build a really solid career off the back of it. But so yeah, our best hire was probably someone that we brought in at the lowest end and sort of built their way up.
Love that. And then final one from me, Josh, and this has been great. So let's see what your answer is to this one. What one thing you would change about the recruitment world?
One thing I would change about the recruitment world, I think the one thing I would change is almost mindset. I know
Okay.
that's a really like vague thing to change, but I think from both the employers and employees, I think people need to start to think more widely, think more outside the box, because it's such a difficult industry, and it's such a difficult sort of time right now for a lot of people. Both employers need to really consider how and why, and when they're recruiting people, have a real clear vision of what that person needs to look like and what they need to be in terms of the makeup of the skills. And then from people who are looking to try and get into employment, like, people need to start thinking outside the box of how they can add value. What skills can I add to my CV? What can make me stand out? What can make me different? Rather than seeing a lot of photocopies, because what you see is in the system at the moment, and especially from the education system, everyone's following the same route. Everyone's, high school, A levels of college, go to university. Everyone's coming out with similar experience, similar grades. You've got to really look at make up your skills, your CV, and make sure that you stand out far and above everyone else. And if you can start thinking outside the box and thinking of ways that makes you creatively different and adds value to organizations, I think that's really key. So, sort of mindset on having a more proactive approach to the sort of recruitment industry, really.
Yeah, I really like that. I couldn't agree more. But Josh, that's been brilliant, and I've really enjoyed this chat. And I think we could sit here for a lot longer and just kind of chew the fat. But I am conscious of time, like I said. So look, thank you again. Thanks for coming on Talent Talks. It's been a really good conversation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Cheers then. Bye bye.